You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record. Welcome back to the podcast. I hope you're having a fantastic summer. I'm delighted to share part 2 of my interview with iconoclastic Los Angeles prosecutor John Lewin. Today's episode returns to the subject of Mr. Lewin's prosecution of real estate heir Robert Durst. And just to give you some background, Robert Durst is widely believed to be the one responsible for the disappearance of his wife, Kathy McCormick Durst. Kathy has not been seen since she dined with friends in Greenwich, Connecticut on January 31st, 1982. When an investigation into Kathy Durst's disappearance heated up in the year 2000, Durst began to kill to cover up Kathy's disappearance. First, killing his close friend Susan Berman on December 23, 2000, and then going on to kill, dismember, and dump the body of his neighbor, Morris Black, in Galveston, Texas. Durst's high-priced attorney, Dick Duguerin, was able to successfully bamboozle a jury into acquitting his client of the murder of Morris Black in 2003, and it looked like Susan Berman's murder might go unsolved until the documentary entitled The Jinx aired on HBO in 2015, and Durst's impulsive bathroom confession, "What did I do? Kill them all, of course," caught the attention of law enforcement. Without further ado, here's the second part in my series of 3 interviews with Deputy DA, the king of cold cases himself, John Lewin. What makes you so exciting to watch as a true crime observer is you're so psychological. You seem to have gotten Durst, and I think that's something Nick Chavin said, was that I feel like you're inside my brain and you're reading my thoughts, something like that.
I thought it was because I was so handsome.
Have you always had that kind of personality, or is there something about your personality that's particularly psychological? Have you always been able to assess people pretty well? And how do you do that?
That's a very interesting question. I am literally the same person inside the courtroom as I am outside the courtroom. If you talk to me right now, I don't have like a personality in court and a personality outside of court. That means that kind of what you see is what you get. So I've always had an interest. I like people, and I think I'm a sincere and genuine person. If you listen to the conversations with Nick Chavin, from the very first time I called Nick, and I want to be fair to Nick for a second, the first call that we made to him was that April 2015. And when we called him, I'd been trying to get a hold of him since Bob was in custody. No way I was going to interview Nick Chavin while Bob Durst was not in custody. Because if you think about it, Roberta, if I would have interviewed Nick, the first thing that's going to happen is Nick is going to tell Bob Durst, and we're never going to see Bob again. So I had to wait to interview Nick until Bob was actually in custody. So as soon as Bob was in custody, I start trying to contact Nick. Nick won't return any calls. I had to basically call his boss at the advertising agency where he worked, and his boss told him, "Hey, you got to call these guys back. They won't leave us alone." So Nick ends up calling us back. And Nick's a very smart guy. And what Nick said was, from the start, Nick really, in that first conversation, he did not say, "Bob didn't tell me anything." What he said is, "I don't want to tell you." Do you remember that or no, Roberta?
Yes, I do.
So I knew from that first conversation that very likely Bob had either confessed to Kathy or to Susan, or to both. And I knew that it was very hard for Nick. I also knew that it was going to take time. And I told Nick from day one, "Listen, Nick, my goal is that eventually you're going to tell me what you know. And it might be our first conversation. It might be, our 10th conversation. But I don't think you will go into court and perjure yourself. So I'm just hoping that before we get to court, you will tell me what actually happened." And it was a long process. And I would say to Nick, Nick, you got to rip the Band-Aid off. So Nick understood that we knew what he knew. And I think he was appreciative that, we were upfront with him. So going back to your question, I love, and I've always found it fascinating to figure out how can I get people to tell me information they have when they don't necessarily want to do it. I also know that I'm taping every single conversation that I'm having, and that eventually that's going to end up in front of a jury. I know when I'm talking to Nick that the jury is going to be listening to this. And I want the jury to understand that I'm a fair, reasonable, decent person. I don't get to sit there and tell the jury, hey, listen, I'm a good guy, you should trust me. But when they're listening to these interviews, I know that's going to happen. For the same reason, when I'm taping Doug Oliver, I know all that stuff's going to get played in court eventually.
Oh, let's get into Doug Oliver. Yeah. Actually, this was like some of the most incredible witnesses in the Durst trial. And they'd come in, they'd deny saying something, and then you'd say, play Exhibit 518. And their statement that they just denied 1 second ago would be, we were all so stupefied by the fact that they didn't know that you didn't have the evidence, that you weren't asking questions that you didn't know the answer to. Were you prepared for the kind of loyalty to Durst that these characters had?
Well, I mean, I was hoping. So if we take it one at a time, Doug Oliver.
For my audience, who was Doug Oliver? I mean, he looks like the devil, really.
Well, Doug Oliver is a very wealthy guy.
How did he get so wealthy?
He got wealthy because he married the daughter of Abe Hirschberg,
who
was at one time a billionaire in New York City.
Sure.
And he married his daughter and ended up becoming kind of a real estate developer as well, never to the level of the Durst organization. And he and Bob became close friends. Now, I knew the relevance of Doug Oliver was that Doug Oliver had not been interviewed during the original investigation. But during the subsequent investigation, Doug Oliver was interviewed. Doug told Joe Becerra from the New York State Police that he believed that Kathy had been abducted into white slavery. Now, obviously, he doesn't believe that. He was very hostile during that, and he's very hostile during any interview. He was an incredibly arrogant individual, probably in my career, the most obnoxious witness I've ever dealt with. The worst. And he came off that way. There was discussion that they were going to call him as a character witness, which I would have loved. I wanted to get him on the stand as early as possible in my case. So I called him as my own witness. Now, one of the things that I like to do, and there was a lot of criticism by these commentators who don't know anything. I am definitely an expert in the California Evidence Code. So I know it backwards and forwards. That's been something my entire career that I have made sure of. Generally speaking, when I go into a courtroom, I know the evidence code better than anyone else in that courtroom. And with one exception I can think of, that's going to be the judge as well. So I know the evidence code very well. In California, traditionally, there are certain things that you do as a lawyer. So one of those things is that the standard way that you handle a lying witness is you ask the witness about their testimony, whatever it might be. Then you impeach their testimony with whatever you have. Then you end up impeaching them kind of in general. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, that's not my approach. What I like to do is I have discovered in my career that if I gut a witness on issues of credibility before I even get to what they're testifying to in the case, then they're done. By the time they give any statements about the actual evidence in the case, the jury is so disgusted with them, they have zero credibility. Traditionally, that's what I do with experts. Mm-hmm. So with Doug Oliver, what I started with was his absolute hostility towards being contacted. And this is a man who we called him up, and I know I'm taping. He doesn't know I'm taping, and I know in advance I'm going to be playing this in front of a jury like. So, I'm going to give this guy enough rope and let him hang himself. So I couldn't have been nicer. I couldn't have been more patient with him. And he was rude from the start, asking us, what are you calling me for? Asking us questions.
He demanded a private plane. He'd be flown on private plane.
No, that's not correct.
No?
He has his own private plane and said we had to pay for his gas. That was
thank you
coming over here.
Thank you for the correction.
So so I knew, and if you listen to the testimony, I started off with his beginning conversations. The first conversation he had was with my partner, was with Habib. Mm-hmm. And he was rude to Habib. Habib's the nice guy. Habib's the good cop. I'm the bad cop. So here's what I mean. I like to be nice. If I can, that's more my personality, the way you heard me with Nick. But if it doesn't work, I'm quite willing to switch and become the aggressive bad guy. Habib is always the nice guy. So Habib ended up contacting him first, and he was rude on the phone. Habib is trying to ask a question, and all Doug Oliver will do is ask Habib questions. Well, who are you talking to? What's your investigation? Habib's like, I can't. It wouldn't be proper. Well, then I'm not going to talk to you. Well, why? Is it a one-way street? Why am I going to give you information? Totally rude. So when I end up calling him back, he originally doesn't want to talk. He gives us a date to call him. He doesn't call. So I call him. He doesn't return it. When I eventually get a hold of him and I ask him, well, where were you? I was on a plane. Well, you picked the date. Why didn't you call? Hey, I was on a plane. What do you want me to do? It's expensive to go for a plane, okay? I don't like the way this conversation is. Rude as can be. Now, I know that the jury is going to be hearing that. I also know that he comes off as the most privileged, I'm not going to say the word, but it might involve a donkey.
Okay.
And I know that his weakness is Bob Durst's weakness. They come off as privileged individuals who are above the law.
Did you make yourself available on February 16th, the date that you requested?
I don't recall.
Isn't it true, Mr. Oliver, that you did not make yourself available, and then you were called the next day on February 17th, 2016? Do you recall that?
That's my recollection. I don't recall any of these conversations.
So as far as you know, you've never spoken to me before?
No, I've spoken to you.
But you don't recall the content of any of the conversations, is that correct?
No, I don't recall the content.
So on the 17th, Mr. Oliver, isn't it true that you were called, and instead of explaining why you had not been available at the time you agreed, you merely stated that you had missed the interview because you were on a plane again? Do you recall that?
No, I don't recall that.
Clip D006, 217-16, page 2, line 10, to page 6, line 9. Mr. Oliver, this is John Lewin, LA County District Attorney's Office.
Oh, hi, how are you?
Well, I'm not real good because we had an appointment yesterday at 1.
Yeah, no, I was in an airplane.
Okay, you realize we made that appointment at that was the date you chose. You didn't call us.
Whoa. I was in an airplane. What am I supposed to do? Okay.
Well, listen.
Don't give me a hard time about it. I'm sorry, okay?
Well, all right, then listen. Let's, we'll.
What exactly? Look, I've been nice talking to you. I have to talk to you. So if you're happy with me in the beginning, then let's not talk.
Well, Mr. Oliver,
I was on an airplane. What do you want me to do about that? It's the story, okay? It was very bad weather down here, and we were delayed.
Well, listen. So then
This is starting to really annoy me, okay?
then we'll take it going forward. Listen, what are you talking?
What's that mean taking going forward?
Meaning,
I'm not a lawyer, okay?
no. Listen. Let me tell you what I mean. So what I'm saying.
I'm upset now, dude. What are you talking about?
Well, here's the situation. When you talk to us,
What is the situation? You're asking for help from me, right?
can I, Mr. Oliver, can you listen to me for a second? You're not letting me answer. You're not letting me answer it.
No, you have to listen to me, okay? You're asking me for help. Don't put me down because I couldn't reach you on the phone, okay? And if you don't want to deal with me that way, then don't deal with me. You don't have to talk to me.
Well, Mr. Oliver, here's the situation. There's a couple of ways.
What situation?
That's not. If I can tell you, I'll let you know. Whether you talk to us is up to you outside of the courtroom. We believe you've got information. If you don't want to speak to us, we'll just subpoena you and bring you to court. I would prefer it.
You have right now, you're getting me upset because you're not, it's very nice, you were very good. Maybe you weren't the person I spoke before. You have a much better manner than you do. But you sit there and immediately attack me because I couldn't pick up the phone yesterday. I do not like that, okay? So why don't you go think about it and then call me back when you decide you want to talk to me like a gentleman.
Well, Mr. Oliver, I'm speaking. Listen. Let's just.
Let's get the facts straight. You're asking for my help, correct?
I'm not asking for your help. I'm asking you to find out information that you have. But listen.
You're asking for your help because why would I do this if it's not you're not asking for something?
Well, I would hope you would do it because two people.
Because why?
Because two people have been murdered.
Well, but they've been murdered when everybody's home.
Well, so that's why we're trying to find out what information you might have. Listen.
I thought in this country that you were innocent and proven guilty. You're sitting there saying that you're assuming that he murdered. I don't know.
I didn't mention Bob Durst at all. I simply said two people have been murdered. But listen, my apologies. Listen, my apologies if I was annoyed that you didn't call us back. And listen, I took you not calling me yesterday as you know what. You just weren't going to speak to us and didn't want to give us a call to let us know. If that's incorrect, then my apologies. And when I said let's take it,
First of all, you don't leave messages, okay?
I did. I left messages on 3 different phones.
I mean, your stuff comes through. I was overplaying.
Okay. Well, listen.
I really feel it's stories. From the airplane, it's expensive to use these phones, okay? They're very expensive.
Would you agree that during that call, Mr. Oliver, that you made clear that you would not speak over the phone, that you would not allow us to come interview you in New York, and that the only way you would come to California was on your private airplane if we paid for your gas? Is that what you told us?
I don't recall it.
Oh, okay.
So that's what I did with Doug Oliver. Now, then I got into the issues of what Doug Oliver knew. If you ask the jury, which I've done, the jurors believe that very likely Bob Durst made damaging admissions to Doug Oliver about Kathy Durst and maybe Susan Berman. So when you show somebody to be a complete liar who's biased, etc., then the jury is going to end up thinking that they're lying for a reason. So that's why that approach was taken with Doug Oliver, and that's why I wanted to call him reasonably early in our case.
Another incredible witness was Susie Giordano. She looked like she was going through some kind of medical issue. She got up, she said she packed a suitcase for Durst with all this money in it, but she didn't know she packed it. She packed it in the dark. Then the UPS guy packed it. Were you prepared for all that?
One of the things, we had a phenomenal team of lawyers. The lawyers on the team were incredible. Ethan Milius, who is the guy that did all of the multimedia, he put the clips together. You know, I would say, I want this clip, and Ethan would pull it and have it ready, etc. So we had thousands of clips pulled on this case. And then I would make out my examination plan. Bob Durst's cross-examination plan was more than 200 pages. Susie Giordano's was, I think, around 100 pages. And so I knew exactly where I was going to go. So one of the things with Susie Giordano was that I wanted to get Susie to say that the suitcase was empty when she got it. And at trial, she fell right into the trap and admitted.
I want you to assume for a moment that those envelopes contain roughly $115,000, that they were inside the suitcase when the FBI opened it.
Yes, that's what I was told.
Do you know how that got there?
I would assume it was in there. I didn't put it in there.
Well, ma'am, you just testified that you took 2 empty suitcases and you put clothes inside.
I did. I just threw everything in. Like I said, my car was running. She had video. I was in there for probably 3 minutes, and I threw some stuff in, and I ran before I would get towed.
So, ma'am, let me show
There
you.
were papers, honestly, in there. I didn't know. I even told the FBI agent that.
People's 219, excuse me, ma'am. When you open the envelope,
Well,
do you see that? Was that in the suitcase when you packed it?
did not look through anything. You would not see a fingerprint, nothing on there, because I didn't touch anything.
220.
We did. Fingerprint, DNA, there is nothing I touched.
It's a lot of cash, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So, ma'am, can you explain how roughly $115,000 worth of cash got into an empty suitcase that you yourself had testified you packed?
Like I said, if it was in there and there were papers in there already, I didn't go through any papers. I didn't touch. You could fingerprint, DNA, whatever you like. I did not touch those envelopes.
Ma'am, that's why I asked you first if they were empty twice.
I didn't. It was dark. I was in his apartment.
Don't argue.
Ma'am?
No,
So-
you can't.
Ma'am, you testified, ma'am, that the suitcases were empty, correct? You just testified to that 5 minutes ago, is that right?
Yes, I didn't look in the bottom. It was a tall suitcase. I literally was in the building. There was video for 3 minutes. I swear on my life. I took a few things. They weren't neatly packed. I threw them in there and I left. And if
Ma'am?
there were papers in there, I'm sorry I didn't look.
Ma'am, I just want to ask you,
I would have overnighted it.
ma'am, you're saying that's what happened, correct?
Yes, that is what happened.
I want to ask you, if you were listening to that story yourself.
Objection, Your Honor,
If
352.
I can finish my question as the court has said.
I'll hear it, then I'll consider it for 352.
Ma'am,
Yes.
would you agree, ma'am, that even if your position is that that's what happened, that in listening to the story, it does not sound very reasonable?
Overruled.
No.
So to you, it sounds like a reasonable story that you took an empty suitcase that had nothing in it, that you packed it yourself, and that $115,000 turned up in that suitcase underneath the clothing, but you didn't know it was there. That sounds reasonable to you.
It's reasonable because it's what happened.
Once she said that, and then I would say, and so you took that empty suitcase and she would say yes, yes, yes. And I know that the guillotine is coming because obviously if the suitcase was empty when you started, how'd the money get there? It was very clear that she was completely lying. You know, she has gotten, the evidence shows that Bob gave her somewhere probably around $500,000. So all of the cutesy stuff she would do and the crying, etc. She's a pretty good actress.
I didn't think so at all. I thought she was a wreck on the stand.
No. This is what I mean. She was a wreck on the stand, but the poor little me, etc. That whole routine. Jean Clark, the other woman that, I don't know if you remember her. Do you remember Jean Clark?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Jean Clark was a tough lady, okay? She was also trying to get money from Bob. And Jean appeared a lot smarter than Susie, but if you look, Jean didn't get any money. Susie got $500,000. So Susie was pretty good at playing different areas of manipulation.
Susie Giordano was in memory just doing these exasperated, like every time she would get caught in a lie, and like look at the jury like, oh, can you believe what I have to put up with? And
yeah, I've not had, in talking to the jurors, there were so many witnesses that they hated. Emily Allman, Stuart Allman, Doug Oliver, Susie Giordano, Jean Clark, and Bob, Paul Kaufman. You know, you're talking about witnesses who the jurors believe, you know, were up there either lying for Bob or lying to try to.
Tommy Durst was asked on a scale of 1 to 100 how cheap was his brother, and he said -50.
No, I think it was Douglas.
Okay, I'm quoting you from court. so
Okay.
You said Tommy. I don't know. Maybe it was Douglas.
I thought
maybe,
that was
maybe
Douglas.
it was Douglas.
They both said he was cheap.
Okay,
though.
so his brother said on a scale of 1 to 100 that he was -50 in terms of cheapness.
Yeah, it was Tom. Douglas talked about him rewinding the odometer on the car that he sold.
God.
Yeah, that was Tom.
Yet he gave at least $350,000 to Susan Giordano, who said she was just a platonic friend of Bob Durst. Why was he giving her that money?
I think it was a combination of, although Bob is extremely cheap, Bob's never really worked. He has all this money. I think that Susan figured out a way to ingratiate herself with Bob.
Bob was giving her the money because I think he intended on at some point having some future relationship with her.
Okay.
I think you can still be cheap and you can give out a bunch of money when it's in your motivation and interest to do so. I don't think that was an act of generosity.
Or you questioned Susan Giordano a lot about on the stand was whether or not she said her relationship was platonic. She'd been married a bunch of times. She was married during the majority of her relationship with Robert Durst, I thought. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, she was married at the time she testified.
And right, and she was still married at the time she testified, although they were separated. Why was it important to you to ask her a lot of questions about whether she loved Durst or whether it was a relationship or just a friendship? I mean, what were you trying to get at there?
Well, it was clear that Susie Giordano assisted Bob. She sent him a bunch of money, which she lied about. She lied about her knowledge of what he had told her. She lied about her attempts to assist him with faking different illnesses, etc. I believe that the jury would listen to her testimony and they would believe that very likely Bob had confessed to her. And in fact, Bob ended up saying that he had told Susie Giordano that he had found Susan's body years ago when he was in New Orleans. So much like with Doug Oliver, the more they were impeached, the more the jury would think that Bob had shared with them additional details. And that's what I think happened.
Bob Durst was upset about his portrayal in All Good Things for one reason, about the dogs. Why was that important and how was that helpful to you?
Well, what's very interesting about Bob Durst is that as much as he lies consistently about so many things, there are also things that he is very truthful about. And to some degree, that explains why he was successful in Galveston, in addition to other reasons we've discussed. But I think that jurors would look at things Bob would say and how, in some ways, honest he was about what a terrible person he was. And they would say, well, if he's admitting to X, but he's denying Y, I mean, maybe we can believe him. So here's what happened with the situation with Igor. When he saw it, he was genuinely and sincerely angry about it. And the reason he was angry about it was for one simple reason. It's not true. Bob did not kill any of his dogs. Bob loved his dogs. And so Bob's reaction to seeing it portrayed that he had killed Igor, it wasn't as if Andrew asked him, hey, Bob, is there something you don't like about what's going on? Is there something that really disturbed you about the movie? And then Bob said, well, I like this, but I didn't like this. Bob literally watched the scene, and without any prompting, he looks up and he goes, now, Andrew, that I do not like. And that's because his sincere reaction was, I didn't kill Igor. Why are you saying that? Now, what Bob doesn't think about, and what somebody who was more self-aware and just cared more, because Bob's very smart, Bob just doesn't care. But most people would say, gosh, I should probably object to the fact that I'm being portrayed as having personally or through somebody else murdered 3 people. So it's kind of like when somebody, accused you says, hey, listen, you murdered 7 children and you had sex with a donkey. And the person goes, I did not have sex with a donkey. Okay, probably good you clarified that. You probably also would have wanted to say, hey, I didn't do any of those things. So the reason Bob responded that way was because it was a true response to something he did not do. How did it hurt him? Well, it hurt him for the reasons I've just said, because everybody understands that if they were accused of crimes like this, portrayed as having murdered 3 people, they would be incredibly upset. They wouldn't be sitting down with the director saying, everything you said was pretty much true. So anyway, that's what I think happened.
And there's a legal term for that too, right?
A legal term.
Adoptive admission?
Yes, correct. And it's a legal term, but it's based on what I just said. The idea is if somebody accuses you of having sex with a donkey, you're going to go, no, I did not do that. And the question, you look at it and you say, would a person in that situation reasonably deny what happened? If they don't, then it's an adoptive admission. Obviously, Bob Durst was not exercising his right to silence. He was not being examined by the police.
He was not saying, I won't talk. He simply chose what he would respond to and what he wouldn't respond to, and he didn't respond to that.
You had 200 pages prepared for your cross-examination of Robert Durst. When he finally took the stand in your cross-examination, what were you expecting and how did he surprise you?
I spent a lot of time in advance trying to figure out what I wanted from cross-examination. He was going to get convicted anyway. I mean, the way that I looked at it was, if it took Bob Durst's cross-examination for the jurors on this case to go, he's guilty, then I've already lost them anyway. If they're that out of touch, they're that stupid, which they weren't, then wow, gosh, until the cross, I didn't think they proved their case. So what I was really looking at is, what can I do to move the ball forward? And moving the ball forward was, I wanted Bob to admit what he had done. Because in the end, no matter whether he's convicted or not, particularly with Kathy, it would mean a lot to her family to get the admission that, hey, I did this and here's what I did with her. Mm-hmm. So the whole premise of cross-examination for me from the start was, what can I do to get Bob to tell me more than what he's already said? Now, he'll probably lie still, but how can I advance it a little further? And so what I wanted to do was, I wanted to have the cross-examination very similar to the way that it was when I interviewed him in New Orleans. So what happened in New Orleans, if you listen to the interview, is Bob forgot who I was and what I was doing there. And we just had a very long conversation. So the defense, as is their custom, made things far worse for their client than it would have been if they just had like a paper mache model of a defense lawyer sitting next to them. Dick decided that he wanted to question Bob from 2 feet away, sitting right next to him. The judge was going to deny the request. And I said, oh, no, that's fine, Your Honor, as long as I get to do the same thing, which they allowed me to do. Now, that was incredibly important, because what that meant was that when I would question him, I would be seated a couple of feet away from him. Never am I aware in the history of any trial that has ever been done in the United States, certainly in modern times, has cross-examination of a defendant occurred where you're both sitting down and you are 2 feet away from each other. So it seems like it's not a courtroom. And that's what I wanted, because that would allow me to really make it more of a personal conversation. The next thing that I wanted to do, and again, this goes back to all these morons on TV, who were like, oh, he's going to go after Bob and, he's going to be ultra aggressive. My style is not to be ultra aggressive. My style is to be very friendly and very non-threatening if I can, because that is the best way to get information. Now, if that doesn't work, I'll move on to the other tools in my toolbox. And definitely, if I look in my toolbox, you're going to find a tool that is a very aggressive prosecutor. It's a tool that I know right where it's at, and I don't have any problem taking it out, and I don't have any problem using it. But that's not where I start. I never had to get that way with Nick Chavin. That's a perfect example. I was able to be myself, and that's how you get information from people. That's the best way to get it. Now, I tried it with Doug Oliver, and obviously I had to very quickly change tools. And I never got back. The nice prosecutor was gone. So my plan was to try to make it as informal as I could and as nice as I could. I also knew that for Bob, the biggest concern that he had, when he was alive, was irrelevance. That was his biggest concern. Bob did not want to go off into the sunset with nobody watching. He's an absolute attention whore. He has to be the focus of everything. This is why he wants to read every article. He tells people, was I on TV? How many media people are there? He looks into the audience. It's very important to him. I knew that. So I made sure that the first thing that I did was that, and it was interesting, and I was not expecting. During the direct, if you remember, at different times, he literally said to his lawyers at one point, why don't you ask John what he wants to know? He's saying that to his lawyers. He's basically saying, hey, let's forget about the preliminaries and let's get to the main event. And when I sat down, I knew that Bob's best move
which he was not capable of pulling off, was to pretend that he didn't understand anything. So basically, to fake as if he had no idea what was going on, a strategy that was Vincent Gigante, who was a very famous mobster, the head of the Genovese family. That's what he did for years. He faked that he was insane, walked around at night in New York, etc. Yeah, bathrobe, etc. And so what I thought Bob would do is he'd get up there and he would say, I don't understand. And he would just act like he wasn't getting it. And even though I would know it was fake, and even some jurors might think it's fake, there would be no way to do it. That didn't happen. On direct examination, Bob answered all the questions. And people were amazed at how good his memory was on direct. And some commentaries said, wow, Bob's really doing well. If you look at the commentary on the direct, it was very funny. Wow, he's going to do it again. Mark my words, he's gonna be acquitted. This man is brilliant in the courtroom. And I knew that he was falling right into the trap because his best move was to pretend that he didn't know anything. Because I had him 6 ways to Sunday. I had every statement he'd ever made. I knew every statement he ever made. I was ready to impeach him with every statement he ever made. He had no way around the lies that he had told. So in other words, I had him dead to rights. If you told him in advance, hey, Bob, John's going to ask you about this, this, and this, there's nothing that he could say. I had him. But it's even worse than that. He didn't even remember his own lies. The defense never knew his own lies. So his only chance was to say nothing. And he didn't take that. So I get up on cross, and the first thing that I want to do is I want to try to build some rapport with him. So I say to him, hey, Bob, what do you want me to call you? And he says, call me sir. Very aggressive, which I was not expecting. So then I had a little speech prepared that I was planning on giving. I thought that Bob, in a lot of ways, was Colonel Jessup from A Few Good Men. There was a 25% chance that Bob would get up there and you can't handle the truth and would start, going through the whole thing. So how do I put him in that position where Bob can just start going off and being Bob? So I said to him, listen, you're up here right now, you're testifying. The whole world is watching. And I'm really hoping, Mr. Durst, that you're going to be truthful, that you're going to tell us what you know. And I was able to get some of that out. There was an objection, the judge sustained it. And that was my hope, that maybe I could appeal to the idea. I couldn't directly say it, but the point is, hey, listen, asshole. Everybody's watching. In a week, you're going to be irrelevant. No one's going to care. You're going to be in a prison cell, and no one is going to talk about Bob Durst again. You won't have an audience. This is your chance. And I had thought that there was maybe a 30% chance that what Bob was going to do, if he thought that the case was going badly, which I know he thought it was going badly, that he would get up and he would admit to everything simply to drag his family into it. So he would say that he killed Kathy and with his family's knowledge or cooperation, or they helped him get rid of the body. In other words, I'm done, so I'm going to take everybody with me. And then it became clear that that wasn't going to happen. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
So this is my cross-examination plan. And so I basically went down. Are you nervous? It seems like you've been waiting for a long time. During your your direct, you seemed almost bored. At one point, you objected relevance to one of DeGuerin's questions. Why did you do that? Were you just being funny, or were you trying to move things along? He ended up saying he was being funny. I wanted that out because I wanted to make sure that the jury understood this guy's completely with it. I explained that I've put hundreds of hours putting this thing together. And, I tell him, hey, I'm going to go through, I've got every inconsistency, everything you've ever said. But I said, what I'm hoping is I want to give you a more attractive option. So I say, hey, listen, I can go through every important inconsistency. And in many cases, every important lie that you've told about all these people, right? And I'm prepared to do that. But I'm hoping, I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, is there anything I can do to try and make it a more attractive option for you to get up here and tell more of the truth than what you've elected to do? So I went through that, and then I went through kind of the rules of testifying, that, you need to answer the questions that I'm asking. And then I started going through, hey, his physical health, I wanted to establish that we had spoken before. I wanted to establish that he had a great memory. All these things. Then I started off with, so one of the things that was really important was that there was one thing on direct that I was concerned that he had made some points for himself. And they weren't points that related to the case, but it was the idea that it was very sad that Bob Durst lost his mother at a young age. And that's a true statement. And that's what happened. And, what if I have jurors feeling sorry for him? I was a little worried about that. So what I also realized in direct was that he had completely lied about the memories. So I wanted to very early in cross demonstrate to the jury that he's a fucking liar, that he basically was trying to prey on their sympathy for him and their sadness about what he had been through. So what I did was I went through and I talked about, the memories with his, I set it all up. How did he feel about his mom? She died early. A lot of times to really hurt somebody in cross, what you want to do is you want to give them rope where they think they are hurting you. So you let them reassert all the points they've made on direct that they think helped them. So they think that they're drumming their point home, and they don't realize that you're just leading them straight off a cliff that they don't see is in front of them. So I let them reassert everything, and then I played the clip. Hey, you would all play Go Fish, Uno, and Frisbee. It was always you on one side and Douglas on the other. Yes, he said that. I replayed the clip. He said they were never on the same team. And then just to make it even worse for him, is it fair to say that when you close your eyes right now, you can literally see, like a movie, the four of you playing Go Fish and Uno and throwing the Frisbee? And, oh, yes, I can see that, etc. I'm watching it, blah, blah, blah. And now here's a trap door. If I were to tell you that the Frisbee was not invented until 1957, 7 years after your mom died, what would be your response? If I were to tell you that Uno was not invented until 1971, more than 20 years after your mom's death. So he's screwed. So then I had the judge take judicial notice of it. So basically, I had already written the motion. I filed it, and we asked to approach in between direct and cross. So they can't do anything to save it now. So it's now my turn. Before I start, we go in, and I let the judge know, and the defense has a hissy fit. Of course, they don't know. They don't know the case. They don't know anything about what he's saying. I don't even think they're checking what he's saying. And the judge agrees, nope, we're right. So that's when I hit him on the Uno and the Frisbee. So that was, I think, a very helpful approach, because it said to the jury, oh my God, we believed him. He's even lying about this. So that put him in a, behind the eight ball situation. Then I hit him with the second big inconsistency, his mom's death and what he said he saw. And he had screwed up because he couldn't make up his mind. He testified in direct that it was his grandfather who got him. Grandfather came into your bedroom, walked down the hallway, pointed to mommy, waved at mommy. However, he told Andrew Jarecki that it was his dad who did it. Now, you're not going to forget that hugely important, impactful, traumatic event and mix up your dad and your grandfather. So he was revealed to be a liar. And then it was all downhill. But as you can see, you're seeing my plan here, right?
So was that the most important thing, to get the jury to feel that he was a liar? Is that the most important thing?
No, I was going to be able to show that he was a liar, no problem. The issue wasn't to show that he was a liar. The issue was to show that he was even a liar about the one area where they might have felt sorry for him.
Right.
So in other words, for them to believe that he was deliberately manipulating them. In a lot of cases, what I've learned over the years, I love a situation where I know that the jury is believing something that a defendant is saying, which is very bad for my case, where I'm watching the jury and they're being impacted by something the defendant has said. They believe him. They feel sorry for him. And I know that at that point in time, I'm losing some points. But I also know that 10 minutes from now, 2 days from now, a week from now, I'm going to end up doing something, putting some evidence in that's going to demonstrate to the jury that everything that the defendant said was a lie. Now, jurors hate liars, but even more than liars, they hate it when they believe them. People get incredibly angry, not just when somebody lies, but when they lie and I believe them. What was important about the stuff I was impeaching Bob on, and this is why the morons don't understand, well, why is he impeaching and why does he start with Uno and his grandfather getting him out of bed? Obviously, that's not the meat of the case. I'm going to beat the shit out of him on the meat of the case for 2 weeks. I want to make sure that emotionally the jurors are like, oh my God, he fucking lied about the whole thing. None of it's true.
Because it was so interesting. I was listening to some of the commentary from the talking heads, and they honed in on that point that I wouldn't ask Bob Durst about Uno and Frisbee. But that was the thing everybody was talking about when he was in direct in the comments was, oh, that wasn't invented yet. You know, it was interesting. Are you watching that commentary when you get home from trying Durst? Are you going home and looking at what people are saying?
I would review the testimony. I would not see the live comments. I would go on and I would see the comments from the commentators, which are going on during the live testimony, but I would not see like the comments that are coming in. So I can tell you that on the Uno and the Frisbee, literally the moment I heard it, I knew that that was a lie.
How so?
Well, for one, because, I knew Uno because my first job, it's a long story. Some people who didn't work used to play Uno at a job that I had. They would sit around playing Uno. This is the early 80s. And I knew that Uno had not been around in the 50s. The Frisbee, for whatever reason, my memory had been that it was the late 50s when the Frisbee was discovered. And I knew Bob's mom died in 1950. I knew the Frisbee was not invented in the 40s. So I didn't know definitively until I Googled it. But I knew within 5 minutes after he said it that it was a lie. Now, there were certain things, and I can't remember, there were certain mistakes that Bob made where I didn't catch him, where I wouldn't hear him. I also have a hearing problem. So, like, I can't remember what it was, but Tim Henderson, one of the lawyers on our case, picked up a big mistake that Bob made that I didn't catch. I didn't hear it.
You talked about Robert Durst wanting to throw his brother under the bus and say, depending on how this trial goes, I might admit that Douglas Durst helped me cover up Kathy's disappearance. Why Douglas and not his brother Tommy?
Well, because he hates Douglas.
But why? That's what I'm asking, yeah.
Well, why? Because, first of all, Tom is much younger. They hardly had any interaction. Tom never worked at the Durst organization. Douglas did. Douglas and Bob were the closest in age, and Bob was passed over for Douglas to run the company. Bob's always had issues with Douglas, and Douglas is the one who's in charge of the family fortune now, basically. Douglas runs the Durst organization. He was the trustee, so that's where all the hostility has been directed. It's always been directed there.
So you had this incredible cross where Durst admitted that he would lie under oath. And then he admitted that he had committed perjury 5 times during the actual trial. Were you expecting that at all?
Well, I knew that Bob was going to have to admit that he had perjured himself in Galveston because he was saying things that were inconsistent. So he testified under oath here to certain things. He testified under oath in Galveston to certain things. I did not expect that he would say that literally I have perjured myself in this actual trial. This is why, and it goes back to, in cross-examination, you're taught to control, to only ask leading questions, yes or no questions. That's easy. It's easy to ask yes or no questions. It's much harder to figure out questions where there aren't good answers that are open-ended. When you have open-ended questions, it allows the person you're cross-examining to make mistakes and open up other areas. So, yeah, I was surprised that Bob said that. I mean, how do you anticipate that?
There is a Perry Mason moment, and it gives me goosebumps thinking about it. Bob Durst is talking, he's answering a question, and he said, I never said I knew what happened to Susan. I never said I knew where Kathy was buried. And you said, well, how did you know Kathy was buried at all? I mean, what was that like for you? And did you think that you had won your case by then?
Oh, we had won our case. There were a bunch of moments during direct and during Cross, where we had a bunch of Perry Mason moments. You're lucky if you get one of those in a career, and we had 20 of them just during Bob testifying. I can't remember if that, I was aware when Bob said the buried that he had screwed it up. There is one mistake, one thing that Bob said that came out, that when it came out, I didn't catch it, and Tim caught it. I can't remember if that is the one. I know that Tim is the one who, heard it first. I can't remember if it's the buried or if it's a different one. So we pulled that over lunch. That's my memory. We pulled the thing that he said, and then after lunch we hit him with it. And of course he had no answer. At a certain point in time, we're just doing the Cross for, prosperity. Mm. I mean, it's over. It's not like, wow, this one, we killed him 178 times. If it's the latest, this last bullet that you're going, wow, I think he's dead now. No, he's been dead since we shot him, 4 days ago. Keep going. We're gonna make sure there's nothing left of him.
Do you think that this trial took on the personality of Bob Durst? Meaning, at times it was very funny. It was very weird, very strange and arrogant, and sometimes off the wall. I don't know. I've just been thinking about that. That seemed to take on the kind of personality of Bob Durst, the feeling of the trial.
Obviously, I think that Bob Durst is a very interesting, unique individual. I think that Doug Oliver is very similar to Bob, which makes a lot of sense. I thought that he hired someone like Loftus. I don't know if she took on his personality, but, was a hired gun who basically was up there not being truthful in her testimony. So, I don't know if it took on his personality. Bob's a narcissistic, psychopath who can't tell the truth, who's got a lot of money. When you're dealing with that, you're in for a show, and that's what we got.
Was there anyone in Bob's life, do you think, that he wouldn't have killed had it conflicted with his own self-interest?
No, I think Bob would have killed anybody that he had to kill. Bob didn't want to kill Susan. Bob cared very much for Susan. Bob killed her because he felt that his survival depended on it. He was right. He just killed her many years too late. So, no, I don't think there's anybody Bob wouldn't have killed because Susan meant as much to him as anybody. He would have killed anybody that he had to kill. That being said, Bob didn't want to kill anyone. It's not like he took pleasure in it. Bob is not a serial killer in the classic sense of they kill because they enjoy killing. Bob killed because he had to do it.
This concludes today's episode with Deputy DA John Lewin. Tune in next time to find out why John Lewin says expert witnesses are like Freddy Krueger. In the third and final episode, Mr. Lewin discusses his extraordinary and devastating cross-examination of memory expert Dr. Elizabeth Loftus. Loftus has testified for Jerry Sandusky, Tim Hennis, Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, worked on the Night Stalker case, the O.J. Simpson case, just to name a few, and the witness for the defense author, Elizabeth Loftus, testified in the Robert Durst trial that she was an impartial witness and not a hired gun for the defense. It's a fascinating discussion. Don't miss it. Please help me make more boat-rocking true crime content you won't hear anywhere else by becoming a patron. The link is in the description of this episode. Up now on my Patreon is a fascinating episode with William Ramsey of William Ramsey Investigates, Lisa O'Brien of the Based in Fact podcast, and Rick Mullinax of the Burn After Reading YouTube channel, and we are discussing the new developments in the West Memphis 3 case. It's an excellent episode. Don't miss it. Until next time, I'm Roberta Glass, and I'm now off the record.